What's going on? We're back at it again with another episode of Combos with Dr. Andy with your boy James and Dr. Andy. Today we're going to talk about spinal health and what it means, what it doesn't mean, what you should look for, what you should stay away from, and potentially breaking down a little bit of the vocabulary that's thrown around to do with your spine that's maybe inaccurate, but was given to you by somebody so you could understand the concept of your spine. So you can go ahead and kick us off, Andy, and all things spinal health. Here we go.
All things spinal health. Yeah. Yeah, man. So I want to first, you had mentioned you had mentioned that people use certain phrases to kind of describe spinal health. So I'll get to that in a minute. So for me, spinal health it's a umbrella term, right? It doesn't necessarily mean one thing, and it can mean multiple things to one person. But at least in my office and kind of how I work and perceive with what I do in my profession of structural correction and chiropractic. So I do a lot of my basis off of x-rays. And so like objective measurements of their spine. So when I use the term spinal health with, say, some of my patients, it may mean something different than maybe another practitioner, right? Doesn't even necessarily have to be a chiropractor, but maybe a PT or an orthopedic surgeon, you name it. So this is just based on my perception with the technique that I used. So in my office with the other Dr. Brian and myself, so we deal a lot with structure. So first and foremost, when you're looking at somebody, right, whether it be through an x-ray or just if they're standing in front of you, okay, from the front or from the back, their spine should look nice and vertical, nice and straight, okay? No deviations from side to side, left or right in this case. If you turn them to the side, so you're looking either at their right side or their left side, okay? You should see some curves. So I drew a little diagram and I'll kind of dissect it a little bit just in case if you're not watching this on YouTube, okay? You can kind of walk through it, kind of just listening. So I kind of made this little, can you see that, James?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Okay. So this is my little stick figure and I wrote front in the front and I wrote back in the back for you guys. The top circle is the head. And then I drew a little squiggly line for their spine, and then a little triangle for their hips, and then their legs. So at the very top, okay, their neck should have a little bit of like a C shape to it, okay, and that's called the lordosis. In their mid back, okay, so think in between your shoulder blades, think where all your ribs are and attach, right, and wrap around your chest. That part of your spine should kind of be rounded over, like a very minimal Hunchback of Notre Dame. Very minimal Hunchback of Notre Dame back, okay? And then the low back is going to look similar to your neck, okay? Where it's going to start to maybe indent in a little bit. So think about like somebody like a cheerleader who kind of sticks their butt out a little bit and their belly kind of goes out and their spine kind of dips inward in their back. That's called lordosis. You should have a little bit of that. And then their tailbone should be similar to their mid back, okay? Think of like, where their butt is, okay? That should have a little bit of what's rounding like their upper back where the ribs are. So the neck and the low back, scientifically, anatomically, those curves are called lordotic, okay? You don't need to remember that, okay? And then the mid back where your ribs are, and then your tailbone, okay, which is where your glutes are, your butt, right? That should have a kyphotic curve. So measurement wise, and again, this is just for, my knowledge, you don't necessarily have to know this to go about your day and your life. But these curves roughly stay normal between 35 degrees to 45 degrees, okay? So with your kyphosis in the mid-back where your ribs are being a little bit less, somewhere around like 25, 28, maybe 32, upwards of 35. But again, those numbers are for me. But essentially, so very, very bird's eye view, okay? James, you asked about my perception of spinal health, is I'm looking for that alignment superficially, okay? So if
define superficially for people that don't know what that means.
So not going into like the structure of their actual and makeup of their actual bone, like the density, whether or not they've had degeneration, arthritis in there, any kind of pathology, right? Not going into like, the integrity of their discs, all that stuff. Or even subluxation, which is just the misaligned vertebrae that affects the nervous system. That's going a little bit too deep from this conversation, but That's what I mean superficially. Like if I just look at somebody, I don't know them at all, right? And I'm just looking at their posture. That's what I'm looking for. I know that some people come in, and I'll let you kind of chime in here too, with maybe some other terms that you might have heard. A lot of people will come in to our office, right? And they'll verbalize to me whether or not they've been at another chiropractic office or maybe another healthcare professional's office, right? Or they may have just like heard this from somebody and they assume that they have it, so they just voice it. I've heard of, oh, hey, doc, my hips are out of alignment, or my disc is slipped, or, my hips are unbalanced, I'm unlevel, uh, my right leg is short, my right foot is short, my left foot is long, and then you coined this, or not coined this, but you mentioned to me this before you hopped on, or, popped a few ribs out of place, right? I kind of want to, touch on each one of those and just kind of, say that I've been, I can be accused of using some of those terms, right, with patients, just because it's, again, I don't necessarily need to go into a 15-minute conversation, right, about explaining everything that's going on in their body. Okay. If I can take care of it on the table, if they want to know, I'll definitely go into more explanation. But most of the time, people don't really want to, sit there and be told like, hey, everything's wrong with my spine. Just fix me, doc. Right. So I'm more than happy to, but unless somebody asks, right, and it's appropriate, I don't necessarily deem that, necessary.